So first of all, let's see how we can initialize some Boolean variables. And so I'm just going to go right here in this onCreate method. And I'm going to use this Boolean keyword, as you can see right here. It is highlighted in blue, and also it is all in lowercase. And we can also use another keyword. We can use this Boolean keyword. So I'm just going to use declare and initialize variables. Okay, so we're gonna say for this boolean, I'm just gonna give you an example. For our computer, might be is Wi-Fi turned on, and we can stop the declaration there. We can also have this boolean with a capital letter, and this one is not something we're gonna be using that often. The one we're gonna be using is this one with the lowercase letter, and I'm just going to give you an example, and so we can say, for example, is USB working? So as you can see, our names for these variables are just like a question, and these questions should be answered with yes or no, with true or false. So as you notice right now, they can only have these values. They can only be set to true or false. So they're working as a switch, which can be on or off, and that's how we're gonna be using them. And I'm just gonna show you right now how we can make some checks for our variables. So we can check if variables are primitive. And what this means is that if they are primitive, they won't be occupying that much space from our memory, and also those are the ones we want to use most of the time. So just to keep in mind that the primitive variables were the first created in Java, and then all the other variables were built on top of those, on the primitive ones. So I'm just going to show you right now an example. We're going to store this inside some Boolean variables, and we're gonna say is, or just int is primitive. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna check if the data type int is a primitive data type. So I'm just gonna say int.class and then is primitive. As you can see, we have this function which returns a Boolean value, and that means it can be either true or false. So I'm just gonna use the same test for let's say integer. That's another data type, and we're gonna say integer is primitive. Normally I would have used this another naming convention. I was using is int primitive, but I just want to have int the first one since it is with lowercase. And I'm just gonna set up this one. I'm just gonna say integer. As you can see, is the one from java.lang, and then we're gonna say .class is primitive. And I'm gonna use a toast message to show you this on the screen, and we're gonna have, let's say, int, and then I'm just gonna attach this int is primitive. We're gonna see if it's true or false, and then almost the same thing we're gonna be doing with this integer data type. And also I'm gonna attach this Boolean variable, and I also want to make sure that the length of this message is set to length long, and I'm going to show you this message on the screen. We are basically expecting to see that the one that's highlighted in blue, as you can see, int should be primitive, and it is primitive, and integer is not primitive. And as a general rule, keep in mind that the ones that are highlighted in blue are primitive, and the other ones are not primitive. And also you can check if they start with a lowercase letter, that means they're primitive, and you can just use them. Another examples would be just showing you a couple of variables. Char would be primitive, and string is not primitive. Just like that. As you can see, this one starts with a lowercase letter, string starts with an uppercase letter, so it's not primitive. Also, if you have data types like calendar from java.util, and I'm just going to call it my calendar. As you can see right now, this one doesn't start with a lowercase letter. It's not highlighted in blue, so that means it's not a primitive data type. This is just a very simple rule that you can follow and make your own checks. But also, if you're not sure, you can use this whatever data type you have, and then dot class, and then dot is primitive, and you can just see if it is or not primitive. Also, we can check to see if our data types are arrays or variables. And we can check this very simple. I'm just going to use first of all a Boolean variable to store this result, and I'm just going to say is array example 1, and I'm just going to say, let's say for string, okay, I'm going to say dot class and then dot is array, and we're going to see if it is an array or not. And the same thing, I'm going to use another example, is array example 2, and I'm just going to use this let's say integer, and then I'm going to be using this brackets, and then class is array. As you just see right now, this is basically a way in which we have to declare arrays, and we're expecting to see that this is an array, but this one that says string is not an array, it's just a variable. So we're gonna leave a comment right here, and this is just a variable. This is an array. And also, I'm just going to use one more example, so I'm going to duplicate that line, and this is example number 3, and I'm going to use one more pair of brackets, and as you can see, it is not giving me any error, it's properly working. And we're going to check if this is also considered an array, and this is actually a 2D array, or you can call it matrix. So it just represents a grid with rows and columns, and this is also an array, or just if you want to call it, you can also call it 1D array, one-dimensional array, just array, or you can also call it vector. So these are some names for what we have right here. I'm just gonna show you this on the screen as well. We're gonna make this test and see what's going to be displayed. And we're going to say right now, say string. So we're going to see for the string class if it's an array or a variable, and I'm just going to use this is array example 1 to just show the result as well. And then I'm going to use a new line. As you can see, \n creates a new line, and then I'm just going to say int and these square brackets, and then using isArray example 2, and same thing for the third one. I'm going to use a new line and then int with 2 pairs of square brackets, and also I'm going to use this isArray example number 3. And I just want to make sure that this one is displayed a bit longer on the screen, and I'm going to run my application. And we're going to see the result displayed right here, and we're just seeing that string is not an array, but the others are arrays. And so our Android Studio program confirms what I just said. And also you can make sure that for example, if you have a string and let's say my text, we can check if it is empty. So an empty string just looks like this. It's not a null string, it's just an empty string. And so we're gonna make this check with an if statement, and we're gonna show a message on the screen if it is or not an empty string. And in order to do this, I'm just going to say my text dot is empty, and as you can see, by default it checks if returns a true value. If you want to put this equals true, we're gonna get this error which says my text is empty equals true. Can be simplified to just my text is empty. So you don't have to just write this down. It is checking by default if it is empty, and if you want, you can also create a Boolean variable, and let's say my check for an empty string. And so I'm just going to check my text if it's empty, and as you can see over here it says that it returns a Boolean value, and that is what we want. Since we want to store a Boolean variable, we want to store a Boolean value inside this Boolean variable, so that's perfect for our program. And we're gonna say my check for empty string. As you can see, it works like that. You can put this Boolean variable inside the expression for the if statement, inside the condition. And right now I'm just gonna show you a message on the screen. So I'm just gonna say string is empty, in case it is, and in our case it is empty. So I'm just going to run the emulator, and you're going to see this message displayed on the screen, or at least that's what we're expecting to see. And that is what we see on the screen.